Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that the San Jose Police Department, SJPD, is experiencing a backlog in processing citizen complaints. A supervisor, reviewing incoming complaints, notices one from a citizen known to have filed multiple frivolous complaints in the past, and another alleging minor rudeness from an officer who has a history of commendations. Supervisor is considering how to best address these complaints to improve departmental efficiency while maintaining accountability. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional practice for the SJPD in this situation? Option A. Dismiss the complaint from the known frequent filer without a formal investigation, citing their history of frivolous complaints, and address the rudeness complaint through a brief informal conversation with the officer, noting it in their personnel file. Option B. Expedite the investigation of both complaints by assigning them to junior officers with strict time limits to clear the backlog, prioritizing speed over exhaustive evidence gathering. Option C. Forward the complaint from the frequent filer directly to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution for filing false reports, and initiate a formal disciplinary review for the officer accused of rudeness, assuming misconduct due to the complaint. Option D. Log both complaints, assign them to the appropriate investigative unit based on SJPD policy, and ensure they are investigated thoroughly and impartially according to established procedures, regardless of the complainant's history or the officer's record. The correct answer is D. Log both complaints, assign them to the appropriate investigative unit based on SJPD policy, and ensure they are investigated thoroughly and impartially according to established procedures, regardless of the complainant's history or the officer's record. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical juncture for the San Jose Police Department, SJPD, regarding the handling of citizen complaints. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative of thorough investigation with the need for timely resolution, all while adhering to the strict procedural guidelines and ethical standards governing law enforcement in California, specifically as they pertain to the SJPD internal affairs and public accountability. The potential for bias, the impact on public trust, and the legal ramifications of mishandled complaints necessitate a carefully considered approach. The best professional practice involves a systematic and impartial review process that prioritizes factual accuracy and due process for all parties involved. This approach mandates that all complaints are logged, assigned to an appropriate investigator based on the nature and severity of the allegation, and thoroughly investigated using established SJPD protocols. This includes interviewing relevant parties, gathering evidence, and documenting findings meticulously. The justification for this approach lies in its alignment with California Penal Code sections related to peace officer conduct and disciplinary procedures, as well as the SJPD's own internal policies designed to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability. Such a process upholds the integrity of the department and fosters public confidence by demonstrating a commitment to impartial justice. An approach that involves dismissing complaints without a formal investigation based on the complainant's perceived credibility or the alleged officer's reputation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the principle of due process and can lead to a perception of cover-ups or a lack of accountability, directly violating the spirit and letter of California law regarding citizen oversight of law enforcement. Furthermore, failing to document the complaint and the rationale for dismissal creates a significant ethical and legal vulnerability for the department. Another unacceptable approach is to expedite investigations solely to meet arbitrary internal deadlines, potentially sacrificing thoroughness and accuracy. This can result in incomplete investigations, flawed conclusions, and a failure to identify systemic issues or misconduct. Such haste undermines the department's commitment to justice and can lead to wrongful disciplinary actions or, conversely, allow misconduct to go unaddressed, both of which are ethically and legally problematic. Finally, an approach that involves retaliating against or intimidating complainants is a severe ethical and legal violation. This directly contravenes California Government Code provisions protecting individuals who report misconduct and erodes the foundation of trust between the community and the SJPD. It is a clear abdication of professional responsibility and can lead to severe legal consequences for the officers and the department. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant SJPD policies and California state laws governing complaint handling. This framework should emphasize impartiality, thoroughness, and adherence to established procedures. When faced with a complaint, the initial step is always to ensure it is properly documented and assigned. The investigation should then proceed systematically, with a focus on gathering objective evidence and ensuring all parties have an opportunity to be heard. Regular review of the process and outcomes is crucial to identify areas for improvement and ensure ongoing compliance with legal and ethical standards. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a high probability of critical evidence being present on a smartphone recovered from a recent burglary scene in San Jose, California. The device was found near the point of entry, but no suspect is currently in custody, and there is no immediate indication of danger that would justify an exigent circumstances exception. The officer believes that accessing the phone's data quickly is crucial to identifying the perpetrator and preventing further crimes. Which of the following actions best adheres to the legal and departmental requirements for handling this situation? Option A. Consult a general departmental guideline that mentions investigative discretion for evidence processing and proceed with a preliminary search of the phone's accessible data to identify potential leads. Option B. Attempt to locate the registered owner of the phone through departmental databases and obtain their consent to search the device's contents. Option C. Access the smartphone's data without a warrant, arguing that its discovery at a crime scene provides sufficient justification for an immediate search to aid the ongoing investigation. Option D. Secure the smartphone as evidence and immediately seek a search warrant from a San Jose magistrate, detailing the probable cause to believe evidence of the burglary will be found on the device. The correct answer is D. Secure the smartphone as evidence and immediately seek a search warrant from a San Jose magistrate, detailing the probable cause to believe evidence of the burglary will be found on the device. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations regarding evidence handling and privacy. The San Jose Police Department, SJPD, operates under California law and departmental policies, which dictate precise procedures for accessing and utilizing digital evidence. A failure to adhere to these protocols can lead to the suppression of evidence, internal disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. The best approach involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This method is correct because it aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by California courts, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. A warrant, issued by a neutral magistrate after a showing of probable cause, provides the legal authority for law enforcement to access specific digital information. This process ensures that the search is limited in scope and justified by a reasonable belief that evidence of a crime will be found. Departmental policies, such as those outlined in the SJPD manual regarding digital forensics and evidence acquisition, mandate this procedure for accessing data from personal electronic devices without consent or exigent circumstances. An incorrect approach would be to access the data without a warrant, relying on the justification that the device was found at a crime scene. This is legally flawed because the mere presence of a device at a crime scene does not automatically grant law enforcement the right to search its contents without probable cause and a warrant. California case law, such as People v. Diaz, emphasizes the expectation of privacy in digital devices, even if found in a public place or at a crime scene. Another incorrect approach would be to seek consent from a bystander who claims ownership of the device. This is problematic because ownership of a device does not equate to the authority to consent to a search of its contents, especially if the device may contain information belonging to others, or if the bystander's claim of ownership is not definitively established. Furthermore, relying on a vague departmental guideline that suggests investigative discretion in such situations without specific authorization for a warrantless search is insufficient. Such discretion must be exercised within the bounds of constitutional and statutory law, and vague directives cannot override established legal requirements for search warrants. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, identify the nature of the information sought and the device containing it. Second, assess whether any exceptions to the warrant requirement apply, e.g., consent, exigent circumstances, plain view, and critically evaluate the validity of those exceptions. Third, if no exceptions apply, prioritize obtaining a search warrant by establishing probable cause. Fourth, consult with supervisors and legal advisors when in doubt about procedural requirements or legal justifications. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that San Jose Police Department officers are responding to a call regarding a suspected drug transaction in a public park. An anonymous caller reported seeing an individual matching the suspect's description, exchanging small bags for cash. Upon arrival, officers observe the described individual, who appears visibly nervous and attempts to walk away quickly when he notices the approaching patrol car. A pat-down search for weapons is conducted, and no weapons are found. The individual continues to exhibit nervous behavior. Based on these observations and the anonymous tip, officers decide to search the individual's pockets. Which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate legal and ethical standard for the San Jose Police Department in this scenario? A. Conduct a thorough search of the individual's pockets based on the totality of the circumstances, including the anonymous tip, the suspect's matching description, his attempt to evade, and his nervous demeanor, to determine if evidence of a crime is present. B. Immediately search the individual's pockets based solely on the anonymous tip and the suspect's nervous behavior, as these indicators suggest criminal activity. C. Detain the individual for further questioning and observation, but do not search his pockets without additional concrete evidence beyond the anonymous tip and his reaction to the police presence. D. Conduct a more intrusive search of the individual's person, including a search of his pockets, due to the suspicion of drug activity and the individual's attempt to flee. Option A. Immediately search the individual's pockets based solely on the anonymous tip and the suspect's nervous behavior, as these indicators suggest criminal activity. Option B. Conduct a more intrusive search of the individual's person, including a search of his pockets, due to the suspicion of drug activity and the individual's attempt to flee. Option C. Conduct a thorough search of the individual's pockets based on the totality of the circumstances, including the anonymous tip, the suspect's matching description, his attempt to evade, and his nervous demeanor, to determine if evidence of a crime is present. Option D. Detain the individual for further questioning and observation, but do not search his pockets without additional concrete evidence beyond the anonymous tip and his reaction to the police presence. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough search of the individual's pockets based on the totality of the circumstances, including the anonymous tip, the suspect's matching description, his attempt to evade, and his nervous demeanor, to determine if evidence of a crime is present. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between the immediate need to secure evidence and the constitutional rights of individuals. Officers must exercise careful judgment to balance effective law enforcement with the protection of privacy and due process. The scenario requires a nuanced understanding of when probable cause exists and the permissible scope of searches and seizures under California law, specifically as interpreted by the California Supreme Court and federal constitutional principles applicable in California. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the totality of the circumstances to establish probable cause before initiating a search. This means gathering and considering all available facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe that crime has been committed or that evidence of a crime will be found in the place to be searched. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as applied in California, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The requirement for probable cause is a fundamental safeguard against arbitrary government intrusion. California Penal Code Section 1538. 5 also outlines procedures for challenging searches and seizures, underscoring the importance of lawful grounds for such actions. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a search based on mere suspicion or a hunch. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the constitutional requirement for probable cause, exposing the SJPD to legal challenges, suppression of evidence, and damage to public trust. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the informant's tip without independent corroboration, especially if the informant's reliability is unknown or unproven. While an informant's tip can be a component of probable cause, it generally requires sufficient indicia of reliability, such as independent police corroboration of predictive information, to justify a search warrant or a warrantless search under exigent circumstances. Failing to corroborate can lead to a finding that probable cause was lacking. Finally, Conducting a search based on the subject's nervous demeanor alone, without other supporting facts, is insufficient. While nervousness can be a factor in a totality of the circumstances analysis, it is not, by itself, enough to establish probable cause for a search. Professional reasoning in such situations requires officers to adopt a systematic decision-making process. This involves 1. Identifying all available facts and circumstances. 2. Objectively evaluating these facts against the legal standard for probable cause. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal advisors when in doubt. And 4. Documenting the basis for any search or seizure meticulously. This process ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and uphold the rights of the individuals encountered. Question 4. Analysis of a San Jose Police Department officer's interaction with a civilian who is openly recording the officer's activities in a public park. The civilian is standing approximately 20 feet away from the officer, who is speaking with another individual about a minor traffic infraction. The recording civilian is not interfering with the officer's duties or posing a safety risk. What is the most appropriate course of action for the San Jose Police Department officer in this situation? Option A. Immediately instruct the civilian to stop recording, citing the need for privacy, without further explanation. Option B. Ignore the civilian's recording and continue the interaction as if they are not present. Option C. Calmly inform the civilian that recording in public areas is permissible, but explain any specific, articulable concerns if the recording is impacting an active investigation or posing a safety risk, while ensuring their own body-worn camera is activated. Option D. Engage in a debate with the civilian about their right to record and the officer's perceived authority. The correct answer is C. Calmly inform the civilian that recording in public areas is permissible, but explain any specific, articulable concerns if the recording is impacting an active investigation or posing a safety risk, while ensuring their own body-worn camera is activated. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing on constitutional rights or compromising their operational effectiveness. The use of a body-worn camera by the officer adds another layer, requiring careful consideration of its activation and the information it captures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer calmly and clearly informing the individual of the department's policy regarding recording in public spaces, specifically mentioning that recording in public areas where there is no expectation of privacy is generally permissible. The officer should then explain any specific, articulable concerns that might necessitate a temporary restriction on recording in that immediate area, such as an active investigation, a sensitive crime scene, or a situation posing an immediate safety risk. The officer should also ensure their own body-worn camera is activated and recording, documenting the interaction and the rationale for any temporary limitations. This approach upholds the public's right to observe and record police conduct, while allowing the officer to address legitimate operational needs. This aligns with the San Jose Police Department's General Order 500 series, which emphasizes transparency and accountability, while also providing officers with the discretion to manage situations that may compromise investigations or officer safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately demand the individual cease recording without providing any justification or referencing departmental policy. This action infringes upon the public's right to record police activity in public, which is a protected First Amendment right, and demonstrates a lack of transparency and respect for community oversight. It can lead to accusations of misconduct and erode public trust. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual's recording and continue with an unrelated or potentially intrusive action without acknowledging the citizen's presence or their right to record. This demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and can be perceived as dismissive or intimidating, potentially escalating the situation unnecessarily. It also fails to address any potential concerns the individual might have about the officer's actions. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument with the individual about their right to record, becoming defensive and confrontational. This unprofessional behavior detracts from the officer's primary duties, can escalate tensions, and creates a negative interaction that is unlikely to be resolved constructively. It also fails to de-escalate the situation and can lead to further complaints. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first prioritizing de-escalation and clear communication. They should be familiar with departmental policies and relevant legal precedents regarding citizen rights. When faced with a potential conflict, the decision-making process should involve assessing the immediate environment and the nature of the police activity. If there are no articulable safety concerns or ongoing investigations that would be compromised, allowing recording is generally the appropriate course. If there are such concerns, the officer must articulate them clearly and calmly to the individual, referencing policy and legal boundaries. The activation of the body-worn camera is a critical step in documenting the interaction and providing an objective record. Question 5. The review process indicates that during a call for a disturbance at a San Jose residence, officers encountered an individual exhibiting signs of acute mental distress, shouting incoherently and holding a garden tool in a non-threatening manner, but in close proximity to their body. The individual was not actively advancing or making overt threats of violence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the San Jose Police Department officers in this specific scenario, adhering to California law and SJPD policy? Option A. Engage the individual physically to disarm them of the garden tool, believing this is the quickest way to ensure safety. Option B. Immediately issue loud, authoritative commands and prepare to use less lethal force to gain compliance due to the presence of an object. Option C. Attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm verbal communication, create distance, and assess for further threats while awaiting potential specialized assistance if available. Option D. Withdraw from the immediate vicinity and wait for the individual to calm down on their own without any further interaction. The correct answer is C. Attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm verbal communication, create distance, and assess for further threats while awaiting potential specialized assistance if available. Explanation. The review process indicates a need to assess the San Jose Police Department's SJPD adherence to California Penal Code sections concerning the lawful use of force and the department's internal policies on de-escalation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to make split-second decisions in dynamic and potentially volatile situations, balancing the need to protect themselves and the public with the imperative to use the least amount of force necessary. The presence of a mental health crisis adds a layer of complexity, demanding a nuanced approach that recognizes the individual's state and potential for de-escalation. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a genuine threat requiring immediate intervention and a situation that could be resolved through communication and alternative tactics. The approach that represents best professional practice involves prioritizing de-escalation tactics and seeking to create space and time for the individual to calm down, while simultaneously assessing the immediate threat. This includes verbal commands, tactical repositioning, and, if available and appropriate, the involvement of mental health professionals or crisis intervention teams. This approach is correct because it aligns with California Penal Code Section 835A, which permits the use of reasonable force when necessary to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or overcome resistance, but implicitly prioritizes less intrusive means when feasible. Furthermore, it adheres to SJPD own policy directives emphasizing de-escalation as a primary strategy, aiming to preserve life and minimize harm. An incorrect approach would be to immediately resort to physical force or less lethal options, without first attempting to de-escalate the situation. This fails to meet the standard of using the minimum force necessary and disregards the potential for a peaceful resolution, which is a core ethical and legal obligation. Another incorrect approach would be to withdraw entirely from the situation without any attempt at engagement or assessment, leaving the individual in a potentially dangerous state and failing to address any public safety concerns. This abdication of duty is professionally unacceptable. A further incorrect approach would be to engage in prolonged, aggressive verbal commands that are likely to escalate the individual's distress rather than calm them, demonstrating a lack of understanding of effective de-escalation techniques in a mental health context. Professional reasoning in such situations should follow a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the threat, prioritizing de-escalation whenever possible. This involves active listening, clear and calm communication, and the use of tactical positioning to create safety. If de-escalation is unsuccessful and a threat persists, officers must then evaluate the necessity and proportionality of using force, considering all available options and their potential consequences, always in accordance with California law and SJPD policy. Question 6. Performance analysis shows a recurring pattern of minor property damage complaints and noise disturbances in a specific San Jose neighborhood, with some residents alleging excessive force during initial police responses. Considering the San Jose Police Department's SJPD commitment to constitutional policing and community relations, which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Establish a policy that automatically dismisses complaints involving property damage or noise disturbances unless accompanied by substantial physical evidence or multiple independent witness corroborations. Option B. Implement enhanced de-escalation training for officers. Ensure consistent body-worn camera usage and review. Conduct thorough and objective investigations into all complaints. And initiate proactive community engagement programs within the affected neighborhood. Option C. Advise officers to prioritize responding to calls with minimal interaction, focusing solely on immediate threat resolution and documenting only essential details to avoid escalating tensions. Option D. Increase patrol presence and issue citations for minor infractions more frequently to deter further disturbances and demonstrate a firm response to the complaints. Correct answer is B. Implement enhanced de-escalation training for officers. Ensure consistent body-worn camera usage and review. Conduct thorough and objective investigations into all complaints, and initiate proactive community engagement programs within the affected neighborhood. Explanation. Performance analysis shows a recurring pattern of minor property damage complaints originating from a specific neighborhood in San Jose, California, often linked to late-night noise disturbances and perceived excessive force during initial responses by patrol officers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the San Jose Police Department's SJPD mandate to maintain public order and respond to calls for service with the need to ensure constitutional policing practices and community trust. Officers must exercise sound judgment in de-escalating situations, using appropriate levels of force, and documenting their actions meticulously, all while adhering to California law and SJPD policy. The best approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted response that prioritizes de-escalation, thorough documentation, and community engagement. This includes officers receiving advanced training in de-escalation techniques and crisis intervention, utilizing body-worn cameras consistently and effectively to capture interactions, and conducting thorough, objective investigations into each complaint. Furthermore, proactive community outreach, such as neighborhood watch programs and regular beat meetings, can foster better relationships and provide early warning signs of escalating issues. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the root causes of the complaints, aligns with the principles of constitutional policing and community-oriented policing, and adheres to California Penal Code section regarding use of force and departmental policies on complaint investigation and documentation. An approach that focuses solely on increased enforcement and punitive measures against residents is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the underlying issues contributing to the complaints and can erode community trust, potentially leading to increased resistance and further complaints. It also risks violating due process rights if enforcement actions are not based on probable cause. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to dismiss the complaints as minor or isolated incidents without thorough investigation. This neglects the SJPD duty to investigate all allegations of misconduct or policy violations and fails to identify systemic issues that may be contributing to the pattern of complaints. Such inaction can lead to a perception of indifference and further damage the department's reputation. Finally, an approach that relies heavily on anecdotal evidence and officer discretion without robust oversight and documentation is also problematic. While officer discretion is important, it must be guided by clear policies and subject to review. A lack of consistent and objective documentation makes it difficult to assess the validity of complaints, identify training needs, or hold officers accountable, thereby undermining public trust and legal accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the reported problem, followed by an assessment of relevant SJPD policies and California state laws. This framework should then involve gathering all available evidence, including witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and incident reports. Based on this objective assessment, Officers and supervisors should determine the most appropriate course of action, prioritizing de-escalation, constitutional rights, and community well-being, while ensuring all actions are properly documented and justifiable. Question 7. The risk matrix indicates a moderate likelihood of a domestic disturbance escalating, and a patrol officer in San Jose, California, arrives at an apartment building. Upon hearing raised voices and what sounds like a struggle from within one of the apartments, the officer approaches the door. The officer knocks, and a male voice answers, sounding agitated. The officer believes, based on the sounds and the context of the call, that evidence of a crime might be destroyed or that someone inside may be in immediate danger. The officer does not have a warrant and has not yet obtained consent to enter. Considering the potential for exigent circumstances, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally sound response for the San Jose Police Department officer? Option A. The officer should attempt to gain voluntary consent from the occupant to enter the apartment. If consent is refused, the officer should disengage and seek a warrant based on the sounds heard and the information from the risk matrix, unless immediate, articulable evidence of imminent destruction or danger becomes apparent. Option B. The officer should immediately enter the apartment based on the information from the risk matrix and the sounds of a struggle, assuming exigent circumstances exist to prevent evidence destruction or harm. Option C. The officer should wait for backup officers to arrive before taking any action, even if the sounds of a struggle suggest immediate danger or evidence destruction. Option D. The officer should use the information from the risk matrix to justify a warrantless entry, as it indicates a heightened risk of a serious incident. The correct answer is A. The officer should attempt to gain voluntary consent from the occupant to enter the apartment. If consent is refused, the officer should disengage and seek a warrant based on the sounds heard and the information from the risk matrix, unless immediate, articulable evidence of imminent destruction or danger becomes apparent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's rights and ensure the admissibility of evidence. The officer must make a rapid judgment call under pressure, considering the potential for exigent circumstances against the established procedures for obtaining consent or a warrant. The risk matrix, while a useful tool for assessing potential threats, does not override fundamental constitutional protections. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the preservation of life and safety while simultaneously respecting the suspect's constitutional rights. This means that if there is a genuine, articulable belief that evidence is in imminent danger of being destroyed, or that a suspect poses an immediate threat to themselves or others, an officer may act under exigent circumstances. However, if such circumstances are not clearly present, the officer must attempt to obtain consent for a search or, failing that, seek a warrant. In this case, the officer's immediate concern for the victim's well-being and the potential for evidence destruction, coupled with the lack of immediate consent and the time required for a warrant, necessitates a careful assessment of exigent circumstances. The officer's actions, if they can articulate a reasonable belief that the suspect was about to destroy evidence or that the victim was in immediate danger that could be mitigated by accessing the apartment, would be justified. The key is the articulable and reasonable belief of imminent danger or destruction, not mere suspicion. Incorrect approach is analysis. Acting solely on the risk matrix without further articulable suspicion of imminent danger or evidence destruction would be an ethical and legal failure. The risk matrix is a predictive tool, not a substitute for probable cause or a warrant when constitutional rights are implicated. Proceeding with a search without attempting to obtain consent or a warrant, and without a clear, articulable belief in exigent circumstances, violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The absence of a clear and present danger or imminent evidence destruction means that a warrant or consent is required. Delaying entry to obtain a warrant when there is a clear and articulable belief that evidence is about to be destroyed or that a life is in immediate danger would be a failure to act responsibly and could lead to the loss of critical evidence or a preventable harm. However, in this specific scenario, the question implies a lack of immediate, undeniable exigent circumstances that would justify bypassing consent or a warrant. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to decision-making in such situations. First, assess the immediate threat to life and safety. If a life is in danger, immediate action to preserve life is paramount and evidence collection becomes secondary. Second, if no immediate threat to life exists, assess the risk of evidence destruction. Is there a clear and articulable belief that evidence is about to be destroyed? If so, consider exigent circumstances. Third, if exigent circumstances are not present, the default is to seek consent for a search. Fourth, if consent is denied, the next step is to obtain a warrant based on probable cause. The risk matrix can inform the initial assessment of potential threats, but must be corroborated by specific, articulable facts before overriding constitutional protections. Question 8. Investigation of a reported domestic disturbance at a residence in San Jose, California, reveals a heated argument between a couple. The reporting party, the female partner, states her male partner grabbed her arm forcefully, leaving a red mark. The male partner claims he was only trying to prevent her from leaving and that he did not intend to harm her. Both parties appear agitated, but show no visible injuries beyond the reported red mark on the female partner's arm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responding San Jose Police Department officers? Option A. Separate the parties, conduct individual interviews with each person, visually inspect the reported injury, and gather any available corroborating evidence before determining probable cause for arrest. Option B. Immediately arrest the male partner based on the female partner's accusation of forceful grabbing, as this constitutes a potential act of domestic violence. Option C. Focus solely on the male partner's statement that he did not intend to harm the female partner and conclude that no crime has occurred. Option D. Advise both parties to calm down and leave the situation unresolved, as there are no severe injuries and the male partner denies intent to harm. The correct answer is A. Separate the parties, conduct individual interviews with each person, visually inspect the reported injury, and gather any available corroborating evidence before determining probable cause for arrest. Explanation. Investigation of a potential domestic disturbance at a residence in San Jose, California, presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the inherent volatility of domestic disputes, potential for immediate danger to officers and civilians, and the critical need to balance investigative thoroughness with public safety. Officers must make rapid decisions under pressure, often with incomplete information, while adhering to strict legal and ethical guidelines. The San Jose Police Department, SJPD, operates under California state law and departmental policy, which mandates specific procedures for handling such incidents. The correct approach involves a systematic and safety-conscious response that prioritizes de-escalation and evidence preservation, while respecting the rights of all involved parties. This includes securing the scene, separating the parties to prevent further conflict, conducting thorough interviews with all witnesses and involved individuals, and meticulously documenting all observations and statements. The justification for this approach lies in California Penal Code sections related to domestic violence, such as PC 273. 5. Corporal injury to a spouse or cohabitant, and PC 273D, child abuse, which require officers to gather sufficient evidence to establish probable cause for arrest if warranted. Furthermore, SJPD internal policies likely emphasize officer safety, victim support, and impartial investigation, all of which are best served by a structured, evidence-based approach. An incorrect approach would be to immediately make an arrest based solely on initial accusations, without conducting a thorough investigation. This fails to uphold the principle of innocent until proven guilty and could lead to wrongful arrests, violating individuals' civil rights. It also bypasses the critical step of gathering corroborating evidence, which is essential for a successful prosecution and for ensuring justice is served. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the incident as a minor dispute without further investigation, even if initial statements suggest otherwise. This neglects the potential for escalating violence and the possibility of serious offenses occurring. It also fails to comply with SJPD duty to investigate all reported disturbances thoroughly, potentially leaving victims unprotected and perpetrators undeterred. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on one party's narrative and disregard the other's statements or evidence. This demonstrates bias and a failure to conduct a balanced and impartial investigation, which is a cornerstone of professional policing and a requirement for establishing probable cause. Such a failure can lead to flawed investigations and undermine public trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate safety assessment and scene control. This is followed by a structured information gathering phase, including interviews and evidence collection, always maintaining impartiality. The legal standards for probable cause must be met before any arrest is made. Throughout the process, adherence to departmental policy and state law, coupled with ethical considerations of fairness and due process, must guide every action. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that in border towns, law enforcement officers must be acutely aware of jurisdictional boundaries. Officer Miller of the San Jose Police Department, SJPD, receives a radio call from a neighboring police department in a different county, stating they have information that a suspect wanted for a felony theft that occurred within SJPD jurisdiction is currently driving a vehicle matching a description provided by their agency, heading towards San Jose. The neighboring agency requests Officer Miller to stop the vehicle. Considering the legal framework governing law enforcement in California, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Officer Miller should immediately stop the vehicle based solely on the request from the neighboring police department, as the information pertains to a felony. Option B. Officer Miller should stop the vehicle and conduct a search based on the suspicion of a felony, regardless of whether he has independent corroboration. Option C. Officer Miller should ignore the request as it originates from a different county and therefore outside of SJPD immediate operational area. Option D. Officer Miller should stop the vehicle if he can independently corroborate the information provided by the neighboring agency and has probable cause to believe the individual in the vehicle is the suspect wanted for the felony theft within SJPD jurisdiction. Correct answer is D. Officer Miller should stop the vehicle if he can independently corroborate the information provided by the neighboring agency and has probable cause to believe the individual in the vehicle is the suspect wanted for the felony theft within SJPD jurisdiction. Explanation. Comparative studies suggest that effective law enforcement requires a nuanced understanding of jurisdictional boundaries and the proper application of investigative powers. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because Officer Miller is operating in a border town within California, where the San Jose Police Department, SJPD, has jurisdiction. The challenge lies in distinguishing between an individual's potential involvement in a crime that occurred within SJPD jurisdiction and the individual's current location and rights, which may be influenced by proximity to other jurisdictions or the nature of the alleged offense. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are lawful and respect constitutional rights, particularly the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The correct approach involves Officer Miller recognizing the limitations of his immediate jurisdiction and the need for proper authorization before initiating a stop and search based on information from a neighboring agency. Specifically, it should confirm that the individual is suspected of a crime that falls within SJPD investigative purview and that there is sufficient probable cause to justify a stop and search under California law. If the information from the neighboring agency is credible and establishes probable cause for a crime within SJPD jurisdiction, Officer Miller can then proceed with a lawful stop and search. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principle that law enforcement officers must act within their authorized jurisdiction and possess probable cause, supported by articulable facts, before detaining and searching an individual. This aligns with California Penal Code sections governing stops and searches, which require reasonable suspicion for a temporary detention and probable cause for a search. An incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to immediately stop and search the individual solely based on a request from a neighboring agency, without independently verifying the basis for the request or confirming that the alleged offense falls within SJPD jurisdiction. This fails to uphold the requirement for independent probable cause and could lead to an unlawful detention and search, violating the individual's Fourth Amendment rights and California's legal standards for stops and searches. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the individual based on a hunch or generalized suspicion that they might be involved in criminal activity without specific, articulable facts linking them to a crime within SJPD jurisdiction. This also constitutes an unlawful detention. Finally, failing to consult with SJPD dispatch or a supervisor to confirm the validity of the request and the jurisdictional parameters before acting would be a significant professional oversight, potentially leading to actions outside the scope of his authority. Professional decision-making in similar situations requires officers to first assess the nature of the information received, including the source and the specific allegation. They must then consider their own jurisdictional authority and the legal standards for stops and searches within that jurisdiction. If there is any doubt about jurisdiction or the sufficiency of probable cause, officers should err on the side of caution, consult with supervisors or dispatch, and seek to corroborate information before taking action that could infringe upon an individual's rights. Question 10. The investigation demonstrates that Officer Ramirez, a sworn member of the San Jose Police Department, SJPD in California, worked a total of 52 hours during the workweek of October 15 to October 21, 2023. His regular hourly base pay is $35.00. During this week, he also received a $100.00 non-discretionary bonus for completing a specific training module, which is considered part of his regular rate of pay under California law. What is the total overtime pay Officer Ramirez is entitled to for this workweek, calculated according to California Labor Code Section 510 and relevant SJPD policies? Option A, $455.00. Option B, $350.00. Option C, $420.00. Option D, $525.00. Correct answer is A, $455.00. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario professionally challenging due to the need to accurately calculate overtime pay for officers while adhering to specific California Labor Code provisions and San Jose Police Department (SJPD) policy. Miscalculation can lead to wage disputes, legal action, and damage to departmental morale and public trust. The core challenge lies in correctly applying the overtime calculation formula, considering the different pay rates and the specific hours worked, ensuring compliance with both state law and internal SJPD directives. The best approach involves meticulously calculating the regular rate of pay by averaging all remuneration for the workweek, including base pay and any non-discretionary bonuses, and then multiplying this by 1.5 for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek, as mandated by California Labor Code Section 510. This method ensures that all forms of compensation are factored into the overtime calculation, providing a true reflection of the employee's earning potential and adhering to the fluctuating workweek concept where applicable, but more importantly, the statutory definition of regular rate of pay. This aligns with the principle of fair compensation and legal compliance, preventing underpayment of overtime wages. An incorrect approach would be to simply multiply the base hourly rate by 1.5 for overtime hours. This fails to account for other forms of compensation that are legally considered part of the regular rate of pay, such as certain types of bonuses or shift differentials, potentially leading to underpayment and violation of California Labor Code Section 510. Another incorrect approach would be to use a flat overtime rate for all hours worked beyond a standard shift, regardless of the total hours worked in the week. This ignores the 40-hour threshold established by California law for overtime eligibility and fails to properly calculate the regular rate of pay based on the entire workweek's earnings. A further incorrect approach would be to exclude certain types of compensation from the overtime calculation based on departmental policy alone, without ensuring that such exclusion is permissible under California Labor Code Section 510. Departmental policies must be consistent with and cannot supersede state wage and hour laws. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Thoroughly understanding the relevant California Labor Code sections pertaining to overtime pay and the definition of regular rate of pay. 2. Reviewing the specific SJPD policies and collective bargaining agreements related to compensation and overtime. 3. Identifying all forms of remuneration provided to the officer during the workweek. 4. Applying the correct formula for calculating the regular rate of pay, ensuring all includable compensation is factored in. 5. Calculating overtime pay at 1.5 times the regular rate for all hours exceeding 40 in the workweek. 6. Documenting the calculation process clearly and accurately for audit and record-keeping purposes. Question 11. Assessment of a San Jose Police Department officer's response to a civilian openly recording a traffic stop in a public park adjacent to the street in San Jose, California. The civilian is standing on a public sidewalk approximately 20 feet from the stopped vehicle and is not interfering with the officer's interaction with the driver. The officer approaches the civilian and demands they cease recording. Option A. Detain the civilian for questioning regarding their intentions and potential interference. Option B. Acknowledge the civilian's right to record, inform them they are not currently obstructing the investigation or creating a safety hazard, and continue with the traffic stop. Option C. Immediately order the civilian to stop recording and confiscate their recording device. Option D. Ignore the civilian and their recording, assuming it poses no threat, regardless of their proximity or behavior. The correct answer is B. Acknowledge the civilian's right to record, inform them they are not currently obstructing the investigation or creating a safety hazard, and continue with the traffic stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing on constitutional rights or escalating a potentially volatile situation. Misjudging the situation could lead to a violation of civil liberties, a complaint against the officer, or even a dangerous confrontation. Careful judgment is required to assess the intent and behavior of the individual recording. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and de-escalatory approach. This means acknowledging the individual's right to record, clearly communicating any specific lawful concerns about their actions, e.g., if they are obstructing an investigation or creating a safety hazard, and then taking appropriate, proportionate action based on those specific concerns. This approach respects the individual's rights while allowing the officer to fulfill their duties. In California, the First Amendment protects the right to record police officers in public spaces, provided the recording does not interfere with the officer's duties or create a safety risk. Officers are trained to recognize and respect these rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the individual to stop recording without any justification. This directly infringes upon the right to record police activity, which is protected by the First Amendment in California. There is no inherent illegality in recording an officer performing their duties in a public space. Another incorrect approach is to physically detain or arrest the individual solely for the act of recording. Again, without any evidence of obstruction or threat. This constitutes an unlawful seizure and a violation of the individual's civil liberties. Such an action would likely lead to a lawsuit against the department and disciplinary action against the officer. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and their recording, even if their behavior is becoming disruptive or potentially dangerous. While respecting the right to record, officers also have a duty to maintain public order and safety. Ignoring a genuine threat or obstruction, even in the context of recording, would be a failure of duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights, de-escalation, and clear communication. When faced with a situation involving recording, officers should first assess the individual's behavior. Is the recording itself the issue, or is the individual's conduct surrounding the recording problematic? If the conduct is problematic, officers should clearly articulate the specific behavior that is causing concern and explain how it violates a law or department policy. They should then offer the individual an opportunity to correct their behavior. If the behavior persists and constitutes a lawful reason for intervention, e.g., obstruction of justice, incitement, then proportionate enforcement action can be taken. If the recording itself is not causing any issues, the officer should allow it to continue. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that investing in advanced de-escalation training for San Jose Police Department officers can reduce the need for physical interventions. In a scenario where an individual is verbally aggressive and refusing to comply with lawful orders during a misdemeanor arrest in San Jose, California, but is not physically threatening, which of the following actions best aligns with SJPD policy and California law regarding the use of force? Option A. The officer should first attempt to de-escalate the situation through verbal commands and by creating distance, only resorting to physical control techniques if the individual escalates to active resistance. Option B. The officer should physically restrain the individual immediately to prevent further noncompliance, regardless of their current level of physical threat. Option C. The officer should immediately deploy a taser to gain compliance due to the individual's refusal to obey lawful orders. Option D. The officer should withdraw from the scene to avoid potential escalation and wait for backup, without attempting any form of control. The correct answer is A. The officer should first attempt to de-escalate the situation through verbal commands and by creating distance, only resorting to physical control techniques if the individual escalates to active resistance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a San Jose Police Department (SJPD) officer regarding the appropriate use of force during a volatile arrest. The officer must balance the immediate need to apprehend a suspect resisting arrest with the legal and ethical obligations to use only the force necessary to achieve that objective, as mandated by California law and SJPD policy. The presence of bystanders and the suspect's potential for injury add layers of complexity, requiring careful judgment to avoid excessive force and potential civil liability or departmental disciplinary action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation techniques followed by the minimum force necessary to gain control of the suspect. This approach prioritizes officer safety and public safety while adhering to the legal standard of reasonable force. Specifically, the officer should verbally command compliance, assess the suspect's actions and intent, and only employ physical force, such as an arm bar or control hold, if the suspect continues to resist actively. If the suspect poses an immediate threat of serious bodily injury to the officer or others, then higher levels of force, as outlined in SJPD policy and California Penal Code, may be justified. This method aligns with the principles of proportionality and necessity, ensuring that force is used judiciously and is commensurate with the threat posed. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately resort to a higher level of force, such as a taser or baton, without first attempting verbal commands or less intrusive physical control measures. This fails to meet the legal and policy requirement of using the minimum force necessary. Such an action could be deemed excessive force, violating California Penal Code sections related to assault and battery, and SJPD use of force policy, which emphasizes de-escalation and proportionality. Another incorrect approach would be to disengage from the situation entirely if the suspect is actively resisting, but not posing an immediate threat of serious bodily injury. While avoiding escalation is important, abandoning an arrest for a crime where there is probable cause can lead to the suspect evading justice and potentially posing a future danger to the public. This would be a failure to uphold the officer's duty to enforce the law and maintain public order. A third incorrect approach would be to use excessive physical force beyond what is required to subdue the suspect, such as continuing to strike the suspect after they have stopped resisting and are compliant. This constitutes excessive force and would violate SJPD policy and California law, potentially leading to criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a tiered approach to force. This involves a continuous assessment of the threat level and the suspect's behavior. The decision-making process should prioritize de-escalation, followed by the least intrusive means necessary to achieve lawful objectives. If resistance escalates, the officer must respond with a commensurate level of force, always mindful of the legal standards of reasonableness and proportionality, and the department's specific policies and training. Documenting the encounter thoroughly, including the suspect's actions and the officer's responses, is also a critical component of professional conduct. Question 13. Regulatory review indicates that during a traffic stop in San Jose, California, an officer observes a driver exhibiting signs of nervousness, including fidgeting and avoiding eye contact. The driver provides a plausible, though slightly vague, explanation for their destination. The officer has no prior information about the driver or vehicle. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take regarding a potential search of the vehicle? Option A. Inform the driver that their nervousness suggests they may be hiding something and request consent to search the vehicle, implying that refusal could lead to further scrutiny. Option B. Detain the driver for an extended period to further question them about their destination and reasons for nervousness, hoping to elicit incriminating statements. Option C. Conduct a search of the vehicle based on the driver's nervous demeanor and vague explanation, as these are indicators of potential illicit activity. Option D. Continue the traffic stop, focusing on the original infraction, and only proceed with a search if specific, articulable facts develop that establish probable cause to believe the vehicle contains evidence of a crime or contraband. The correct answer is D. Continue the traffic stop, focusing on the original infraction, and only proceed with a search if specific, articulable facts develop that establish probable cause to believe the vehicle contains evidence of a crime or contraband. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge faced by law enforcement officers in San Jose, California, balancing the need for immediate public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals during a traffic stop. The officer must make a rapid assessment of a potentially volatile situation, considering the information received, the demeanor of the driver, and the legal parameters governing searches and seizures under California and federal law. The core of the challenge lies in determining whether probable cause exists to justify a search beyond the scope of a standard traffic infraction investigation, without infringing upon the driver's Fourth Amendment rights. The best professional approach involves a meticulous and objective assessment of all available information to establish probable cause for a search. This means the officer should focus on observable facts and behaviors that directly link the vehicle or its occupants to criminal activity, rather than relying on hunches or generalized suspicions. Specifically, if the officer develops a reasonable suspicion that the driver is under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or that there is evidence of a crime beyond the initial traffic violation, they can articulate these specific observations to justify a further investigation, which may include a search incident to arrest or a search based on probable cause if exigent circumstances exist or consent is voluntarily given. This aligns with the principles of the Fourth Amendment, which requires probable cause for searches and seizures. In California Penal Code sections governing searches and seizures, an incorrect approach would be to conduct a search solely based on the passenger's nervous demeanor or the driver's evasive answers about their destination, without any articulable facts suggesting criminal activity. This would likely violate the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as nervous behavior alone does not constitute probable cause. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the driver for an extended period without developing further reasonable suspicion or probable cause, thereby exceeding the scope of the initial lawful stop. This could lead to a claim of unlawful detention. Finally, attempting to coerce consent for a search by implying negative consequences if consent is not given would be an unethical and legally invalid tactic, as consent must be freely and voluntarily given. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal statutes. This involves 1. Clearly articulating the initial lawful reason for the stop. 2. Continuously assessing the situation for developing reasonable suspicion or probable cause based on objective observations. 3. Documenting all actions and the specific facts that justify each step taken. 4. Understanding the limitations of their authority regarding searches and seizures and seeking supervisory guidance when in doubt. Question 14. Consider a scenario where an officer is responding to a noise complaint in a public park in San Jose, California. While the officer is speaking with the individual responsible for the noise, a bystander begins recording the interaction with their smartphone from a distance of approximately 15 feet. The bystander is not obstructing the officer's path, nor are they interfering with the conversation, but they are clearly visible and audible to the officer. Officer feels uncomfortable being recorded and believes it is hindering their ability to conduct a thorough investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately order the bystander to stop recording and confiscate their smartphone, citing a perceived hindrance to the investigation. Option B. Engage the bystander in a debate about their right to record and the officer's feelings of discomfort, becoming defensive about the situation. Option C. Ignore the bystander entirely and continue the interaction, regardless of their presence or any potential discomfort the officer feels. Option D. Calmly inform the individual that while recording is generally permitted, they must maintain a safe distance and not interfere with the investigation. Then request they step back slightly if their current position is perceived as intrusive. The correct answer is D. Calmly inform the individual that while recording is generally permitted, they must maintain a safe distance and not interfere with the investigation. Then request they step back slightly if their current position is perceived as intrusive. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing upon constitutional rights or escalating the situation unnecessarily. Misjudging the situation could lead to a violation of civil liberties, a complaint against the officer, or a breakdown in community relations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation and clearly communicating the department's policy regarding recording. The officer should calmly inform the individual that while recording is generally permitted, certain actions, such as obstructing an investigation or creating a safety hazard, are not allowed. The officer should then explain the specific behavior that is causing concern, e.g., getting too close, interfering with the scene, and request the individual to move to a designated safe distance. This approach respects the individual's right to record, while upholding the officer's responsibility to conduct their duties effectively and safely, aligning with the principles of community policing and constitutional rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately ordering the individual to stop recording and confiscating their device. This action directly infringes upon the individual's First Amendment right to record police activity in public, which is well established. Such an action would likely lead to a civil rights lawsuit and severe damage to the department's reputation. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and continue with the interaction as if they were not present, even if their behavior is becoming disruptive or unsafe. While not as overtly rights-violating as the first incorrect approach, this fails to address a potential issue that could escalate and compromise the safety of the scene or the public. It demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and proactive problem-solving. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument with the individual about their right to record, becoming defensive and confrontational. This escalates the tension, wastes valuable time, and detracts from the primary law enforcement objective. It also models unprofessional behavior for the public and can erode trust. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations with a framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and adherence to established policies and constitutional rights. The process involves 1. Assessing the immediate threat level posed by the recording individual's actions. 2. Recalling and applying relevant departmental policies and legal precedents regarding citizen recording. 3. Communicating calmly and assertively, explaining the boundaries of acceptable behavior. 4. Offering reasonable alternatives or requests to mitigate any perceived issues. 5. Documenting the interaction thoroughly. Question 15. Upon reviewing a call for service regarding suspicious activity in a San Jose neighborhood, Officer Miller observes an individual matching a general description provided by the caller loitering near a parked vehicle. The individual appears nervous and avoids direct eye contact. Officer Miller has a hunch the individual might be involved in recent vehicle break-ins in the area, but lacks specific evidence directly linking this person to any crime. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take under California law and SJPD policy? Option A. Immediately detain the individual for questioning based on the hunch and the general description, without advising them of their rights. Option B. Conduct a pat-down search of the individual for weapons based solely on their nervous demeanor and the general description. Option C. Place the individual under arrest for suspicious behavior, citing the recent string of vehicle break-ins as justification. Option D. Approach the individual, identify themselves as a police officer, and ask the individual if they are willing to speak with them, informing them they are free to leave at any time, while observing the individual's behavior and surroundings for further articulable facts. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual, identify themselves as a police officer, and ask the individual if they are willing to speak with them, informing them they are free to leave at any time, while observing the individual's behavior and surroundings for further articulable facts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the procedural rights of an individual during an investigation. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance these competing interests, while adhering strictly to the California Penal Code and San Jose Police Department (SJPD) policies. The correct approach involves a meticulous and documented process of securing the scene and initiating a preliminary investigation without infringing upon the suspect's rights. This includes clearly informing the individual of their rights, specifically the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, as mandated by Miranda v. Arizona and codified in California law. The subsequent actions must be based on probable cause, which requires more than mere suspicion. It necessitates facts and circumstances sufficient to warrant a prudent person in believing that the suspect had committed or was committing an offense. The SJPD policy on arrests and detentions, which aligns with state law, emphasizes the need for probable cause before any custodial interrogation or arrest can occur. This approach respects individual liberties while ensuring that investigative actions are legally sound and admissible in court. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a custodial interrogation without first advising the individual of their Miranda rights. This failure directly violates established constitutional protections and California statutory requirements. Any statements obtained under such circumstances would likely be deemed inadmissible in court, jeopardizing the prosecution's case and potentially leading to disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the individual indefinitely based solely on a hunch or the presence of a known associate with a criminal history, without any specific articulable facts linking the individual to a crime. This constitutes an unlawful detention, violating Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures and California's standards for reasonable suspicion. Finally, immediately arresting the individual without sufficient probable cause, even if the officer believes they are involved, would be a significant legal and ethical misstep, potentially leading to civil liability for false arrest. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves a step-by-step assessment of the situation. First, ensuring all legal advisories like Miranda are given when necessary. Second, gathering objective facts to establish reasonable suspicion for a temporary detention or probable cause for an arrest. And third, acting decisively but within legal boundaries, documenting every action and observation meticulously. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal advisor is a crucial part of responsible decision-making. Question 16. When evaluating a situation where officers have received a credible tip regarding a suspected drug manufacturing operation within a private residence in San Jose, California, and observe suspicious activity consistent with the tip from a public vantage point, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to preserve potential evidence while respecting constitutional rights? Option A. Wait for a significant period, potentially hours, to ensure all legal procedures are meticulously followed before any action is taken, even if it risks evidence degradation. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the destruction or removal of evidence, and then immediately begin the process of obtaining a search warrant based on the observed activity and the initial tip. Option C. Conduct a full warrantless search of the residence to gather all potential evidence of the drug manufacturing operation. Option D. Enter the residence to conduct a brief protective sweep for any individuals present, using this opportunity to look for obvious signs of drug manufacturing. The correct answer is B. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the destruction or removal of evidence, and then immediately begin the process of obtaining a search warrant based on the observed activity and the initial tip. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the immediate need to gather information and the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing police investigations. Officers must act swiftly to secure evidence and potential leads, but doing so without proper authorization or regard for individual rights can compromise the investigation, lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence, and result in disciplinary action or civil liability. The need for rapid response in a potential crime scene necessitates careful judgment to balance urgency with legal compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene to preserve potential evidence and then immediately seeking the appropriate legal authorization, such as a search warrant, before conducting a detailed search of the residence. This approach respects the Fourth Amendment rights of individuals against unreasonable searches and seizures, as guaranteed by the United States Constitution and interpreted by California law. By securing the perimeter and awaiting a warrant, officers ensure that any evidence subsequently collected will be admissible in court, and that their actions align with established legal precedent and departmental policy regarding search and seizure. This upholds the integrity of the investigation and the SJPD commitment to lawful policing. Incorrect approach is analysis. Conducting a full search of the residence without a warrant or exigent circumstances is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. This approach risks the suppression of any evidence found, thereby jeopardizing the prosecution of the suspected crime. It also exposes the officers and the department to potential civil lawsuits for violating constitutional rights and could lead to severe disciplinary action. Delaying the investigation indefinitely until a warrant can be obtained, even if there is probable cause and a clear indication of evidence within the residence, is also professionally unsound. While warrant requirements are paramount, officers must also consider the potential for evidence destruction or loss if immediate action is not taken to secure the scene. This approach fails to balance the need for lawful procedure with the practical realities of crime scene management. Entering the residence to conduct a brief, protective sweep, for individuals without specific articulable facts to believe an armed suspect is present or in danger is an overreach. While a protective sweep is permissible under specific, narrowly defined circumstances to ensure officer safety, it is not a general license to search for evidence. This approach could be construed as an unlawful search if not justified by genuine safety concerns, leading to the same evidentiary and disciplinary issues as a full, warrantless search. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures while remaining adaptable to the exigencies of law enforcement. This involves 1. Assessing the situation for immediate threats to safety and potential for evidence destruction. 2. Identifying if exigent circumstances exist that would justify immediate action without a warrant, e.g., hot pursuit, imminent danger, imminent destruction of evidence. 3. If exigent circumstances are not present, securing the scene and diligently pursuing the necessary legal authorization, e.g., warrant. 4. Consulting with supervisors or legal advisors when in doubt. This systematic approach ensures that actions are both effective in pursuing justice and legally defensible. Question 17. The analysis reveals that Officer Miller, responding to a call regarding a suspicious package left unattended at a busy public transit station in San Jose, California, observes the package emitting a faint ticking sound. Given the potential for a dangerous device, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Immediately attempt to open the package to determine its contents and neutralize any potential threat. Option B. Secure the immediate area, establish a perimeter, and request specialized units, e.g., bomb squad, to assess and handle the suspicious package, while simultaneously initiating a lawful search of the surrounding area for any related evidence or individuals based on observable facts. Option C. Leave the scene to respond to other calls, assuming the package is not an immediate threat and will be handled by other authorities. Option D. Conduct a quick visual inspection of the package from a distance, and then proceed with routine patrol duties. The correct answer is B. Secure the immediate area, establish a perimeter, and request specialized units, e.g., bomb squad, to assess and handle the suspicious package, while simultaneously initiating a lawful search of the surrounding area for any related evidence or individuals based on observable facts. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the meticulous adherence to established legal procedures. Officer Miller's judgment is critical in balancing the urgency of the situation with the constitutional rights of the individual. The correct approach involves securing the scene and requesting specialized units, such as a K-9 or bomb squad, if the suspicious package nature warrants it, while simultaneously initiating a lawful search based on probable cause or exigent circumstances, if present. This approach is correct because it prioritizes officer safety and public well-being by taking immediate, albeit controlled, action to mitigate potential threats. Furthermore, it respects the legal framework governing searches and seizures in California, ensuring that any subsequent evidence collection is admissible. The California Penal Code and relevant case law, such as those interpreting the Fourth Amendment, mandate that searches be conducted with a warrant, probable cause, or under specific exceptions to the warrant requirement. By involving specialized units and proceeding with a legally sound search strategy, Officer Miller upholds these principles. An incorrect approach would be to immediately open the package without further investigation or legal justification. This fails to account for potential dangers and bypasses the procedural safeguards designed to protect individual liberties. Such an action could be deemed an unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment, rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious package entirely and leave the scene without taking any precautionary measures. This would be a dereliction of duty, failing to address a potential public safety threat and violating the SJPD mandate to protect and serve the community. A third incorrect approach would be to conduct a cursory search of the immediate vicinity without properly securing the package or considering its potential contents, thereby risking exposure to harm and failing to adequately investigate the suspicious item. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with an immediate assessment of the threat level. This is followed by a consideration of available resources and the relevant legal parameters. In situations involving potential hazards, the priority is to ensure safety while simultaneously initiating a process that respects legal and ethical obligations. This often involves a phased approach. Secure the area, assess the risk, consult with supervisors or specialized units, and then proceed with actions that are both legally permissible and strategically sound. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that the San Jose Police Department, SJPD, has received a credible, albeit uncorroborated, tip regarding a potential public safety threat occurring within a commercial establishment in San Jose, California. The tip suggests that illicit activities are taking place that could endanger patrons. The establishment has multiple surveillance cameras, both inside and outside. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for responding officers to take to gather information and assess the situation? Option A. Wait for a search warrant to be issued before approaching the establishment or attempting to gather any information, to ensure absolute adherence to all legal protocols, even if it means delaying the assessment of a potential public safety threat. Option B. Rely solely on the initial tip and any voluntary statements from individuals encountered outside the establishment, without attempting to obtain any form of recorded evidence or further corroboration, due to privacy concerns regarding surveillance systems. Option C. Directly access the establishment's surveillance camera system without consent or a warrant, believing the urgency of the situation justifies bypassing standard legal procedures to obtain immediate visual evidence. Option D. Immediately begin an on-scene investigation by observing the premises from a lawful vantage point, engaging in consensual interviews with any individuals present who are willing to speak, and simultaneously initiating the process to obtain a search warrant for the establishment's surveillance footage and any other relevant digital records. Correct answer is D. Immediately begin an on-scene investigation by observing the premises from a lawful vantage point, engaging in consensual interviews with any individuals present who are willing to speak, and simultaneously initiating the process to obtain a search warrant for the establishment's surveillance footage and any other relevant digital records. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat and the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing the collection and use of such information. Officers must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that their actions are both effective and lawful. The San Jose Police Department operates under California state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and departmental policies designed to uphold these rights. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes obtaining necessary information through legally permissible channels while respecting individual privacy rights. This includes immediate, on-scene observation and questioning of individuals present, consistent with the legal standard for investigatory stops, reasonable suspicion. Simultaneously, initiating formal requests for relevant data from third-party entities, such as businesses with surveillance systems, through established legal processes like search warrants or consent, is crucial. This approach ensures that any information obtained is admissible in potential legal proceedings and respects due process. It aligns with California Penal Code sections related to search and seizure and the department's own guidelines on evidence collection and privacy. An incorrect approach would be to bypass legal procedures by directly accessing private surveillance footage without consent or a warrant. This action violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as private property and data are generally protected. Such a violation could render any evidence obtained inadmissible in court, undermining the investigation and potentially leading to civil liability for the department. Furthermore, it breaches ethical standards of professional conduct by disregarding established legal safeguards and individual privacy. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on witness statements without attempting to corroborate them with available, legally accessible evidence. While witness testimony is valuable, its reliability can vary. Failing to seek objective evidence, such as surveillance footage or other digital records, when such resources are reasonably and legally obtainable, represents a failure to conduct a thorough and professional investigation. This could lead to an incomplete or inaccurate understanding of the situation, potentially resulting in miscarriages of justice. A further incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation significantly by exclusively pursuing a search warrant for all potential data sources before conducting any on-scene investigation or making preliminary inquiries. While warrants are essential for certain types of searches, an overly rigid adherence to this process, without first exploring less intrusive, legally permissible investigative steps, can hinder the timely resolution of a public safety concern. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a tiered approach, starting with immediate, lawful actions and escalating to more formal legal processes as needed, always guided by the principles of necessity, proportionality, and legality. Question 19. Implementation of evidence preservation protocols by a San Jose Police Department officer at a potential burglary scene presents a critical juncture. The officer arrives to find clear signs of forced entry and what appears to be a valuable item missing. The officer has basic training in evidence identification, but is not a certified crime scene investigator. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to ensure the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of any potential evidence? Option A. Collect the evidence and store it in the officer's patrol vehicle for safekeeping until a supervisor can be contacted. Option B. Collect the apparent evidence oneself, documenting its location and condition, and then transport it to the station for processing. Option C. Secure the scene. Immediately notify a supervisor and the relevant investigative unit, and await specialized personnel to process the scene and collect evidence. Option D. Secure the scene and thoroughly document the evidence's location and appearance with photographs, but leave the scene to respond to another call, planning to return later. The correct answer is C. Secure the scene, immediately notify a supervisor and the relevant investigative unit, and await specialized personnel to process the scene and collect evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for San Jose Police Department, SJPD, officers regarding the proper handling of evidence in a potential felony case. The officer's actions directly impact the integrity of the investigation, the admissibility of evidence in court, and public trust in law enforcement. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the potential for evidence degradation or contamination, necessitates immediate and correct procedural adherence. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene, immediately notifying a supervisor and the relevant investigative unit, e.g., burglary unit, and awaiting specialized personnel to process the scene and collect evidence. This approach is correct because it aligns with established San Jose Police Department policies and procedures for felony investigations, which emphasize the importance of maintaining the chain of custody and ensuring that evidence is collected by trained personnel to prevent contamination or improper handling. This meticulous approach guarantees that the evidence will be admissible in court and supports a thorough and unbiased investigation, upholding the principles of due process and justice. Incorrect approach is analysis, failing to notify a supervisor and waiting for specialized units, instead opting to collect the evidence oneself, risks improper collection techniques, potential contamination, and a break in the chain of custody. This violates SJPD policy and compromises the integrity of the evidence, potentially leading to its exclusion from court proceedings and jeopardizing the case. Collecting the evidence and storing it in an unsecured personal vehicle before notifying a supervisor introduces significant risks of tampering, loss, or contamination. This action directly contravenes SJPD protocols for evidence handling and storage, undermining the reliability of the evidence and the investigation. Documenting the evidence's location, but leaving the scene without securing it or notifying appropriate personnel creates a substantial risk of evidence loss, destruction, or tampering by unauthorized individuals. This demonstrates a failure to prioritize the preservation of critical evidence, which is a fundamental duty of a law enforcement officer and a violation of SJPD procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and procedure, especially when dealing with critical elements like evidence. This involves recognizing the scope of their authority and training, understanding when to escalate a situation to a supervisor or specialized unit, and consistently maintaining the integrity of the investigative process. In situations involving potential felony evidence, the default professional action is to secure, document, and await expert processing, rather than attempting to manage complex evidence collection without proper authorization or training. Question 20. To address the challenge of accurately calculating Officer Miller's overtime pay for the pay period ending on Sunday, October 29, 2023, given his regular hourly rate of $30.00, and considering he worked 10 hours on Monday, October 23rd, regular workday, 8 hours on Tuesday, October 24th, regular workday, 10 hours on Wednesday, October 25th, regular workday, 8 hours on Thursday, October 26th, regular workday, 10 hours on Friday, October 27th, regular workday, 12 hours on Saturday, October 28th, a designated SJPD holiday, and 6 hours on Sunday, October 29th, regular workday. What is the total overtime pay Officer Miller is entitled to, assuming SJPD policy dictates 1. 5 times the regular rate for hours over 8 in a day or 40 in a week, and double the regular rate for hours worked on a designated holiday? Option A, $1,050.00. Option B, $1,080.00. Option C, $1,020.00. Option D, $990.00. The correct answer is B, $1,080.00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in San Jose, California, involving the accurate calculation of overtime pay based on departmental policy and California labor law. Miscalculations can lead to financial disputes, grievances, and potential legal action against the department, impacting officer morale and departmental budget. The core challenge lies in correctly applying the principles of overtime calculation, particularly when dealing with different rates and potential complexities like holiday pay or compensatory time off, ensuring compliance with both internal SJPD policies and state regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous, step-by-step calculation of overtime hours, applying the correct hourly rate for each period. This approach ensures accuracy and adherence to both SJPD internal overtime policy and California Labor Code requirements. Specifically, for overtime hours worked beyond 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week, the rate should be 1. 5 times the regular rate of pay. For hours worked on a designated holiday, the rate should be double the regular rate of pay, as per typical departmental policies and California law for holiday premium pay. This systematic method minimizes errors and provides a clear, defensible record of pay calculation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply average the different pay rates across all overtime hours worked. This fails to account for the specific premium rates mandated for holiday work and the standard overtime rate, leading to an inaccurate overall overtime payment. It violates the principle of paying the correct premium for specific circumstances, as outlined in labor law and departmental policy. Another incorrect approach is to only apply the standard 1.5x overtime rate to all hours exceeding 40 in a week, regardless of whether some of those hours were worked on a holiday. This overlooks the higher premium pay entitlement for holiday work, resulting in underpayment for those specific hours, and a violation of both departmental policy and California law regarding holiday compensation. A third incorrect approach is to round down any partial overtime hours to the nearest full hour before applying the overtime rate. This practice is a direct violation of wage and hour laws, which require accurate accounting of all hours worked, including fractions thereof, and paying for them at the appropriate rate. It constitutes wage theft and is ethically unacceptable. Professional reasoning. Law enforcement professionals must approach overtime calculations with diligence and accuracy. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the specific departmental policy on overtime and holiday pay. 2. Familiarizing oneself with relevant sections of the California Labor Code, pertaining to overtime and premium pay. 3. Maintaining detailed and accurate records of all hours worked, noting any hours worked on designated holidays. 4. Applying the correct pay rate for each category of overtime, standard overtime vs. holiday overtime. 5. Performing calculations systematically, using a calculator or spreadsheet for precision and double-checking the results. 6. Seeking clarification from supervisors or the payroll department if any aspect of the calculation is unclear.